Kate, welcome to the Limitless Equation. Thank you so much for being here today. I know you are incredibly busy right now, so it means so much to have you here. I'm genuinely personally really excited because you and I had never spoken before, and I came off your call like, whoa, who have I just met? I love her. She's just powerful. So I'm selfishly really looking forward to this because I think I'm going to get a lot out of this conversation like I did last time. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Chloe.
Exciting. So tell me your superpower. Where did we land? What have you been thinking since? Fill everyone in.
Yeah, so we landed at my superpower was hustler. And I think it was about halfway through that I had said to you, I'm a hustler. And I think that that's what has helped me achieve what I have and has given me a lot of confidence. Since we last spoke, I've been thinking a lot about what does a hustler actually mean? And I think it's about really holding yourself to account, being ambitious and working really hard, being creative in how you go about solving problems and leveraging all the resources that you have around you. And I think the thing I've thought about the most since we caught up is how do I really think about what type of environment can I create around me with my family and with my team so that people feel that they can learn from that and leverage that and feel, brave enough to maybe act a bit differently.
You've obviously thought about how you can bring your superpower to others. Was that something that you kind of recognize of, yeah, I am really good at doing that for myself. How can I now champion other people through that? Or what was the thinking process behind that?
I think, the thinking, I don't think I ever really thought too much about how I got to where I got to. I just, beyond saying that I worked really hard and I leveraged the resources around me. And following our conversation, I spent a lot of time breaking down how did I get there? What was the formula behind it? And who were the people that influenced it? What was the environment that was created that nurtured that type of thinking and behavior?
Can you tell me all of that?
Yeah, sure. Well, if I start with the environment that I grew up in, I was one of four kids growing up in a pretty wealthy area of Connecticut, which is about an hour east of New York City. And my father left when I was around 13 years old, and my mom, who hadn't been formally educated or ever really worked before, had to figure out what she was going to do with four kids under the age of 15 and no education and not much in savings. And so while she worked at nights at a hospital so that we can have health insurance, and during the day went to school and became a real estate agent, I was at home figuring out how am I going to help raise myself and my brothers and sisters. And so there was a component of, I was in a position where I had to figure it out, but I had the trust of my mom to be able to do so. She believed that at even a really young age, I had the maturity and the skills to really help look after my brothers and sisters, which was everything from schoolwork to dinner. In addition to that, I also was a nanny for a 3-month-old baby and, was looking after, I was the head nurse of the hospital's little girl, Hannah, at the time. And so being in an environment where I didn't have a lot to work with, but I had the trust of my mom and a few other really strong women in my life who entrusted me not only, with looking after my brothers and sisters, but their children as well. I didn't always get it right, and I made mistakes, and being honest and forthcoming with, how I was handling things, how, what mistakes I was or wasn't making, and being in a really safe environment to be able to talk to my mom about what was going on. I wasn't the best student, and I wasn't the most well-behaved kid either.
That doesn't surprise me.
And so I think that, going back to, trust, my mom was really aware that she had entrusted a lot with me, and that I had a lot of responsibility at a lot of young age. So she gave me a bit of a longer leash than she probably felt comfortable with, but she knew that that's what she needed to do in order to allow me to have, the childhood that I wanted to do and have the level of exploration that I wanted to have. But, if I kind of ever went out of line, she really held me back and held me to account. Um, and, even though we didn't have a lot growing up, my mom never let that be an excuse. And I was instilled with such a high level of accountability, accountability over excuses. So while we didn't have the access that a lot of my friends might have had from a financial perspective, we still had a lot of access to people and resources and relationships. So quite a young age, I got a job working for a textile broker who was connected to someone I babysat for. And over summers, I did that when I was probably about 17 or 18. And from there, I had met his son, who was running an office in New York City, brokering high-end Italian yarns and fabrics. And I started to think about, well, these are all resources that are around me, and how can I start to think about how I do the best with what I've got, and take some of those skills that I'd picked up from a really young age around looking after my brothers and sisters to looking after myself. And with that, I boldly had a conversation with the owner of this textile firm and asked if I was to move to New York City, did he think he can help me get a job with his son? And he had said yes. And so I moved to New York City when I was 17 years old, and I worked with his son during the day, and I put myself through uni at night. And by the second year of it, I had brokered a deal with the owner of the textile firm to actually pay for my tuition. And then my salary was deducted from it. And it created this cycle of me having a crack and, asking for something and thinking about how I can use the resources around me, and just building that kind of confidence and skill set.
I think the thing that I loved about you when we spoke, when that hustler mentality, was just you weren't afraid to ask.
Hmm.
And I just love that in you, because I think, and I don't know if you see this as well, so many people are afraid to ask
Yeah.
for what they want, ask for help, ask for the
Mm.
resources they need. Do you see that in people around you?
I think that where I was really lucky is that I didn't have a lot of options. And while my growing up at times was pretty tough, it put me in a position where my option sometimes was only to ask for help. And what I found and what I've been lucky to experience is, more often than not, people will help, and people will be really generous. So I think that when I think about people around me, I think people are more often than not, I think people are really reticent to ask for help. One of my biggest observations is that people try to solve everything themselves. They're more often than not really afraid of saying that they don't know, and they're even more afraid of showing that they've made a mistake. Whereas, given the situation I was in, I had to ruthlessly embrace saying, I need help. I don't know. I think I screwed up.
Have you got any examples of that throughout your career that other people might be able to learn from?
Yeah, if I think about when I started my job in fashion and I had moved from product development and into buying, there were certain components around fashion forecasting that I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. And I was a bit younger than a lot of my peers. And there was this fear of, being caught out. And I thought, well, I'm either going to get caught and lose my job, or I can just say, I don't really know how to do this, and, build a skill. And so, leaning in, I had reached out to my planner at the time, Amy, and said, I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. And she goes, well, I don't think anyone does, but let's sit down and try to understand, like, what is it that you're having a problem with? And I think that, being vulnerable and asking for help really go hands in hand. I think that if you start with, admitting that you don't know, and being vulnerable with someone else, most people aren't going to kick you down. If anything, they'll put the hand out and help pull you back up.
I was presenting this week at a NGen session, like it's like a junior cohort coming through, and I was so surprised how many of them were talking to me about how fearful they are of losing their job and
Hmm.
doing anything wrong, because I'm having that conversation obviously at a senior level at the moment. Like everyone is talking to me like I feel like I'm on thin ice and
Hmm.
like, we don't know what's going to happen next in the market, and there's that fear at that level. But it really surprised me at that junior level, especially around that I don't want to do anything wrong. I don't want to
Hmm.
make mistakes. And I think pulling on that is then that I don't want to ask for help, because I don't want it at all levels across the industry at the moment. People don't want to be seen to not know it,
Hmm.
know what they're doing.
Hmm.
But I think we're in a point where no one really knows what they're doing
That's right.
more than ever.
Yeah, and I think not only that, as a leader, the person you're going to trust is the person who you know is going to say, I don't know what you mean. I don't
Mm,
understand, or I think I've made a mistake. Because immediately you reflect on that and think, wow, I can really trust this person. If they say they understand, if they said that they've delivered something, I believe them wholeheartedly, because I know that they've got the confidence to equally admit when the same is not true. So I say to my team all the time, I have 3 golden rules, and one of them is like, bad news travels fast. If you don't know, come quickly and ask for help. I have a pretty big job, and mistakes can impact, a lot of our team members or a lot of our customers. And um, it's always better to be vulnerable and say that you don't know and ask for help, and you'll most likely be more trusted as an outcome of that.
100%. And what are the other two? You said you got 3 golden rules.
Yeah. So my first golden rule is to assume good intent. I think that we get very stuck in our own heads around why people did something. And there's often, I think, a lot of projection. And I think if you start from, someone's asked me to join a meeting, or someone excluded me from a meeting, more often than not, when you're at the end of something that feels negative to you, you put negative intent around that other person's action. And I think that that just creates a level of negativity and pessimism that's completely unhelpful. And more often than not, the answer on the other side of it might just be that that person was really busy, they were having a bad day, or they simply forgot. And I think that, key to the second thing I think that's really important to me is just having that view of treating everyone with positive intent. Assume that people are coming from the right place, and focus mostly on, if you didn't feel good about it, well, then share that with them and say, that didn't make me feel good, but assume that they're coming from a really good place. The second for me is around collaborate wildly. I am a extremely expressive extrovert, and I've been working in my company for 15 years, and I've been working in my industry in retail for probably about 25. And that means that I'm institutionalized. I have a very narrow perspective. I have a specific way of thinking, which is, being expressive and extroverted. And that's going to miss a whole lot of creativity if I don't bring in people who have different perspectives with their experiences, and really importantly, people who think differently. And as I reflect on, some of the biggest projects that I've worked on in my career, they were the best because I had an introvert, partnered with me, who was thinking really, really differently, and more often than not didn't work in my field, but came from, a very different field like finance or technology. And then the third one is bad news travels fast.
Mm.
Always ask for help.
The minute you said collaborate wildly, there was something in my heart that just was like, oh, this is why I like her so much. There was that like, yeah, I can see that in you. How do, for anyone who's struggling with the collaborate wildly, because I think I'm seeing at the moment as an industry, we're in a bit of a position around like everyone's fighting for remit, because again, going back to
Hmm.
that, am I going to lose my job? But no one
Hmm.
wants the responsibility because they don't want their neck on the line if things go
Hmm.
wrong. I don't know if you've seen that play out
Hmm.
at the moment. So that collaboration piece, I think, is something that we're grappling with at the moment. Have you got any advice around that?
When people talk about collaboration, I think they often think that they forego accountability, responsibility, and ownership. And I think it's the opposite. If you're working on something, and you are looking to collaborate, it's really about bringing people in who are going to build on your ideas, challenge your ideas, and contribute, which will ultimately bring more creativity and more innovative thinking than you'll get on your own. But you're not beholden to your collaborators. And I think that that's what people really struggle with, is that they think that the minute that they invite other people to collaborate, you're giving up your power.
Mm.
You're giving up your accountability, you're giving up your ownership, you're giving up whatever it is that you're working on, and you still own that. You're just asking other people to help build upon it, and you still ultimately get to decide what components you keep, and what you might say, that's really interesting, but probably not for me on this one. I think the second challenge is that people think that an invitation to collaborate is sharing that you don't have the answer, or that you're even what would probably be even more scary is that you're not capable of answering it. And I just take a step back and think to myself, well, who cares? Because creativity always comes through diversity of thought. And if you want really great solutions, then why not be as creative and diverse as possible?
Do you think that we're heading towards more collaboration or less collaboration in the current market?
I think in the current market, we're moving to less collaboration. We learned to work really differently during COVID, and I think it's great, the flexibility that it allowed a lot of us. But what I think it also did is, in an environment where you're communicating with people on screens, you sometimes lose the flow of conversation. When we're using collaborative tools like, docs set up in Teams, we sometimes more quickly think about what's my page, what's my part, and really sticking within that. And if we think about the benefits that we had, in a large room with post-it notes where the flow of the conversation could, move with the energy of the room and the people within it, where there was a little bit of talking over each other and building, but it was building to something that was better. I think we became much more polite and structured through a Teams-based conversation, particularly in Melbourne when we were in lockdown for such a long period of time, and with that lost a little bit of collaboration.
I think there's something around the fact that yes, we're being more polite and more formal, but in some ways we've become faceless as well, right? So there's like people are more blunt with each other
Mhm.
and not seeing them as other humans that, oh, well, what other value may they add
Mhm.
outside of the square that we've put them in?
That's a great build. And if I think about what had to happen first, in order to engage with other people where you have different views, if you don't have a base of reputation, if you don't have a base relationship that's been born out of more like human characteristics, things become really transactional quite quickly when it comes to different points of view. And I think that we sometimes lose the casual coffees, the lunches together, having a drink after work. And in doing so, there's no trust or base to be operating off of when you get into a more professional environment. It can become transactional quite quickly.
We need to slow down a bit to be able to do that. Like I was just come from working with the leadership team this morning, and there's a new guy in the team and he's working internationally. And I said, right, you're going to have a coffee with everyone in this room, just a virtual coffee with everyone in this room before you get into the work, because it's going to make the work so much quicker.
Mhm.
And I could almost feel like the hesitancy with everyone else, like there's no time for that. And it's like,
Mhm.
we need to remember the art of relationships is how we get stuff done so quickly.
That's right.
It just wouldn't happen without that human connection.
No, absolutely. And when I have new people join the team, these are the people that you need to have coffee with. Always has to be the first, because most people deliver work through other people or with other people, and having an understanding of who they are as a human, what's going on within their life, what's really driving them, gives you opportunities to find, common grounds that you can connect with them on, so that, when you need something, they might be more likely to help and lean in. And if you're having something that's a bit more challenging, you've got the relationship's been a bit insulated with that base relationship.
And you mentioned at the beginning of this that you kind of reflected on like where that hustler mentality came from, and you've shared
Hmm.
that with us, but you said now you're thinking around how do you project that and make sure you create those environments.
Hmm.
What are you doing around that? Like what's the hopes, the dreams, what's in action?
Yeah, mhm. I've been thinking a lot about accountability, and I think I'm still noodling away on it. But one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is if you if you can lean into accountability and see that as something that's exciting and empowering, you can the motivation around trying to find creative ways to solve problems and leveraging the resources around you becomes much more natural because you're taking ownership of the problem or the task rather than taking a position of, I've been asked to do something or I need to do something, and here's everything that's getting in the way.
Can we talk about, you said you're grappling with it. What are you
Mhm.
struggling with?
Yeah, I was thinking about, what is being a hustler? It's really holding yourself to account. And if you hold yourself to account, you just sit back and be like, well, it's on me. Like,
Mm.
I've got to figure it out. You accept that you might not have all the resources that you want. You accept that you might not have the direction or the time that you need, and you move on. And I think that you move on with empowerment rather than moving on with feeling inhibited.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you've fought against, sorry if this is overstepping the line, but is that victim mentality.
That's
You were
right.
never going to be that person.
That's right. No, I think that when you grow up with challenges and everyone has their own, you can either sit and feel sorry for yourself and think about what you didn't get, but that doesn't really move you on. But I always wanted to think about what was I able to achieve and how did I build upon it.
Mm.
And I find that a much more empowering position to be in rather than I'm a product of what I didn't have. It's more around I'm a success with what I did and
Mm.
what I did with it.
And I think the timing of us having this conversation is really important
Mhm.
because I think the market that we're in at the moment, I feel like everyone feels like they don't have enough and things are hard and things are
Mhm.
tough. And actually, to your point around extreme ownership, how
Mhm.
do I take accountability
That's
for
right.
getting myself out of this with what I do have is quite a strong, direct message that I think people need to hear right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that resources will always be a constraint, and that's not going to change. Um, but what you do with it, the mentality that you take, will is what's within your control, and the sense of accomplishment that you have at the end of it is what then powers your ability to push even harder, think even more differently the next time. One thing that I do, which it might be a product of listening to, my mom would sometimes listen to uh, Anthony Robbins tapes in the
Mm-hmm.
car when we were growing up, because she's in this mindset of I'm working nights at a hospital and I'm going to learn how to sell real estate and get my license and move into sales. And so my mom used to listen to a lot of motivational speakers when she was driving us back and forth to school, and thinking about having that like I can do it mindset is really, really helpful. But what I find even more helpful is like at the end of the day, like having that PIR with yourself around what did you accomplish, and then really thinking about how did that make you feel. Because ultimately for me, over time, the pride and the exhilaration that comes with accomplishments really starts to overcome the fear. And if you think about it in a physical sense, it's like running a marathon. Like, it's so bloody hard in the beginning, and the training is relentless, and it's raining, and you get injured. But when you cross that finish line, it is an incredible feeling. And, whatever, however you take that metaphor in your life, the next time you have a really challenging project, it's not thinking about, how tall the mountain is and how much work there is to get through. It's just going back about, but yeah, how did I feel, when I crossed that finish line? How did I feel when I got my diploma, thinking that, how am I ever going to go to college growing up, in the situation that I did? How did I feel, the first time I had an international flight and was the first person in my family to leave the country? It's really reflecting on that, and it's more than gratitude, it's pride. And I think that pride is sometimes that has such a taboo. It's one thing as an American living in Australia and learning about tall poppy syndrome, and I think that the humility that Australians have is wonderful, and there's so much grace in it. But I do think that we shouldn't be ashamed to be proud of ourselves and to share our accomplishments, because you need that feeling to power, getting through the next challenge, whether it be asking for help or, stopping a job, starting a new one, or making any big life decision.
I think that there's a lot to be learned from where you're from on that, from the people I've spoken
Hmm.
to around. I'm English, obviously, so we've got tall poppy syndrome as well. Like, you better off to take the piss out of yourself than say that you're good at
Hmm.
anything. But I genuinely believe that it holds us back. I've kind of built a loop that I talk about, which is a bit what you're talking about when you're saying about the mountain. I don't see it as a mountain anymore. I see it as like, okay, set my intention, be really clear about what I want, take the action I need, celebrate myself, and then go back to the beginning. So
Hmm.
instead of like that, oh, I need to get to the top, that, I need to run the marathon. For
Hmm.
me, it's like, to your point, I need to go and train for the
Hmm.
first time. Intention, okay, I'm going to train.
Hmm.
Action, I'm going out, my shoes are on and I'm running.
That's
And
right.
I celebrate myself when I get back and I go, yes, you did that. Well done, Chloe, you've got this. Or text the girls and say, girls, I just did my first run. Like, and then go back. Okay, what's my intention now? Right.
Hmm.
Well, now I want to do it for the next 5 weeks straight and I want to hit X goal and then start doing that. And to your point, just building that loop of self-belief, going, I've got this. Like, and I'm enjoying the journey along the way because I'm checking in with how I feel.
That's
It's
right.
not just about that end
Yeah.
result. Although when you get there, stop and
Hmm.
pause and celebrate yourself and shout it from the rooftops that you did it.
Yeah.
Because to your point, that needs to drive you into the
Hmm.
next phase of whatever challenge you
Hmm.
choose to take on.
And I think that, we quickly move to sport metaphor, but I think that's pretty important. One thing that I think about a lot is how important it is that I build up my own self-worth in environments that I can control.
Mm.
And if you're going through that cycle purely in a work environment, you're putting yourself in a really fragile position, because you're really dependent on how everyone around you responds to what you're doing. And so another thing that I've always tried to do within my life is think about, what are the accomplishments, what are the new things that I'm going to try, that sit outside of work, so that it's something that I can completely own. And it's not always a marathon. I mean, it could be everything from like learning how to cook something that you've never cooked before, or, you know, reading a book. I get a huge sense of accomplishment out of finishing a book. And I really try to wallow it in a positive way and be like, oh, well done, you got through that series. It took ages, but just feeding yourself that positive loop. I really like that
Mm.
metaphor.
I like the thought of feeding yourself as well, because we're so trapped in like that negative mindset and
Hmm.
catastrophizing and what's going on in the world, and actually just to come back to self and
Hmm.
go, what did I do? Like, what have I got? I loved what you said at the beginning around evaluating your self-worth in environments that you can control. I
Hmm.
love that,
Hmm.
because that way I speak to so many people, and I think this is one of the reasons your conversation resonated with me so much, that outsource that external validation.
Yep.
And the thing that I found when I spoke to you was like, you're marking your own homework as to whether you've done a good or bad job, and you're not afraid to give yourself the positive or negative feedback on that
That's right.
journey.
Absolutely. I think that if I was to think about what I'm really proud of in my life, work is part of it, but there's probably, it's probably 10% of what it is, and being a good person and having hard conversations with people, being there for my friends, learning something new. Those are the things that I've built my esteem around. And it means that if you have a bad day, that's okay. Like if you have a bad day at work, your world hasn't fallen apart, because it's part of it, but it's not everything. And I spoke earlier about like insulating relationships, and I think a lot about that with myself. Like, how am I making sure that I have I have enough self esteem that's built out of how I think of myself, so that, when I am in a position where someone's not happy with how I've executed something or a decision that I've made, I'm okay with that. I'm not going to fall apart, because there's enough other things in my life that I can be really, really proud of.
How do you make sure you get that balance? Because I have just spoken to some people who are like, work's become my life.
Hmm.
What would be your advice around that as someone who's good
Mm.
at it?
I I think my starting point is that I have one, never been able to do it all. Um, at a young age, I always worked and I went to school and I had jobs, which meant that I was never the best at school. I was never the best at work. And I was never able to have all the fun that I wanted to, particularly living in New York City at a really young age. And so it's not about having it all, it's about prioritizing and reprioritizing. Um, I had, you know, heard this anecdote years ago around thinking about your life as a jug. And within that jug, you need to fit rocks, pebbles, sand, and water. And if you think about your life, the rocks are the really big things. They're the things that matter the most. They're your health, your family, your friends. And then the pebbles might be your hobbies and your job. And the sand might be committees and things that you're accountable for. And you know what? Maybe your house being clean all the time, maybe that's the water. And then if you think about fitting everything in the jar, you put your rocks in first, and then you put your pebbles, and then you put in the sand, and then you put in the water. And I think going in with that, you know that you've prioritized what's really important to you. And the bits that you might forget or not get perfect are the things that you've decided don't really matter. So all my herbs are dead. I've never had a vegetable give me any like I've never planted anything that's actually borne any vegetation. I'm at Bunnings once a year replacing a third of my house plants, and that's okay, because I know that what was really important was looking after my health and well-being, and looking after my family, and my job is actually is a pretty big rock in my life as well. And I think the second thing is that you have to be able to, you kind of go through seasons, and you have to reprioritize, and those rocks will change. I've recently picked up a new hobby, which is sailing, and I started doing that a year and a half ago, and I realized how important that was to my mental health and well being. And so, taking on something new like that, I had to go home and say to my husband, I love this sport, I really want to do it, but it means that I'm going to be gone for 4 hours every Saturday for 7 months a year. So, what are we going to do with that? And how did we think about the trade offs that we would make? And all that was lost was, some of the water, some of the stuff that wasn't really as important.
You're so intentional about the way you live your life. I feel like that hustler mentality, hustle can kind of come across as like someone who doesn't stop and think. It's like just on to the next. Like
Hmm.
we grind. Whereas the reason I think it's your superpower, not a weakness, is because it's intentional
Hmm.
hustle. It's like, right, I want this next. So
That's
what do
right.
I have to do about it?
Exactly. And I'm going to figure it out.
And I think you pause, and I love what you just said. My favorite thing, you had the difficult conversation with your husband around, so what does this mean for us? Like, you got your stakeholders kind of at
That's
home
right.
checked off to go, we're in this together. What does that look like?
Absolutely. And I think that, I mean, a lot of things in life we're not doing alone. We're doing with other people, and I think that sometimes we forget, um, you know, the ones that are the kind of closest to us, and how much they're like an enabler of all the decisions that you make, and also just communicating to everyone else so that people are aware around, why you might be making different choices. I recently got to spend a day doing a leadership lab where I got to be really focused on what my objectives were for the year. And, the first thing I did is I went home and told my husband, and we talked a little bit about what we thought that would mean. And then, I spoke to my team, and then we're going to have some time off site in a couple weeks around, okay, if these are the big rocks for the year, what does that mean? How are we going to get behind it? I think more often than not, people add, and and then ultimately you get overwhelmed, and you feel like you're not really doing anything well. You're never going to do everything well, but make sure that the things that you're not doing well are the things that you've already decided aren't that important.
And going back to that loop, like be intentional about what
Hmm.
you're going to do it, and then stop and celebrate yourself along the
That's
way, right?
right.
Like it can't just be,
Yeah.
oh, I'll do my big rocks, but then
Hmm.
that's a given. I have to do that, right?
That's
Like
right.
actually
Yeah.
celebrate yourself as you go through that process.
Yeah, totally. I said I was a year and a half into my new sailing hobby, and I very audaciously decided that I wanted to compete in the state championship for the specific boat that I sail, which is called the Sabre. And I went in with three objectives, which was finish every race, don't hit any other boats, and try not to come last. And so I was 53 out of 55, and I printed out the final list, and I put it on the fridge, and I was just like, I'm so proud of being 53, because
Yeah.
I went into it with, what's important to me, what do I want out of this, and really celebrated it. I don't think often in life you celebrate being last, and sometimes it's like, yeah, but I played.
Mm.
I went out and I did it.
And that was something you would have never dreamed at some point that you could do,
No,
like that's a version of you that didn't exist before. And
that's right.
by doing that, I
Hmm.
love earlier when you were talking, it wasn't the way you talk, you don't talk about what you achieved, you talk about who you became as you were doing it. And
Hmm.
that's why you're able to celebrate 53,
That's
because you're
right.
like, the woman who did that had to be resilient, she had to learn new things, like you became someone else through that
That's
process.
right. That's right. Exactly. And it was once again a situation where I didn't do it on my own. I had the support from home. And I was really intentional about it. And I had the support of, my yacht club around me, and people who taught me and coached me and took me under their wing. And I just sit there and being like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And, every now and then someone's like, okay, like, what are you doing here? But by and large, most people are like, oh, that's great. You want help. And I get people coming to me after races now with taking pictures and been like, this is what you've done wrong. And I'm like, okay, that's great.
Yeah, I love
Thank you,
that.
because I wouldn't have known.
Yeah, no, I love that. Kate, I feel like you're like, you live and breathe a lot of the things that this podcast stands for. Like, I started this podcast because if you and I had spoken 2 years ago,
Mhm.
I would have just looked at you like, that's impossible to have that mindset. How does she do it? Yeah, I would have had that, yeah, right, not, like I wouldn't
Mhm.
have had full investment in it. The last 2 years of my life, I've been obsessed with learning about self belief. And I feel like you've been living it most of your life. And it's something I'm in the process of learning and then trying to take others on that journey.
Mhm.
From your life experience and who you are as a person, what would be your key advice? Where to start? I'd just love to try and capture, if you were running a seminar on this,
Mhm.
what would it entail?
I think with self belief, it's a process. And people often set themselves up for failure when they try something new. And I think that if it comes to self belief, you have to think about it as building a muscle, um, and creating a habit. And I think that for me, my advice would be start with something small that you haven't done before, that you think you might have no business doing whatsoever, and go and give it a go. And you'll most likely be successful. And then think about what the next thing is, and then what the next thing is, and what the next thing is. It is 100% a a muscle that you need to build over a period of time, and thinking about how you can do that within a safe environment is probably really, really important. And so you don't have to say, self belief's really important to me. So now I'm going to go speak at a conference with 500 people. I'm like, wow, that sounds risky to me. Whereas you might start with something, much smaller, like I'm going to go and, do a hike of something that I've never done before. I'm going to try to learn, something that I haven't learned before. Or it might be that I might try to contribute more in a meeting, but it's really around starting small, creating environments where you'll get feedback. And the feedback doesn't always have to be from other people. It's just that you can observe what you've done, and then really doing that PIR, having that reflection at the end of it, and holding on to how you felt after, not how you felt at the beginning. And yeah, keeping that with you.
I think that's great advice. I want to talk to you for so much longer, but I've run out of time. At the end of every episode, we celebrate the woman we would like to celebrate. But as of today, you are my first guest. We are also celebrating a man that we would like to celebrate too. So in either order, who are your limitless people you would like to celebrate?
The limitless woman that I like to celebrate is my mom. I was able to see such an important woman in my life at such a young age, find herself in a situation that was really challenging. And she lent into it, and she was brave, and she was bold, and she was equally wild. And to watch my mom navigate having 4 children and have to rebuild her life, all the while having a smile on her face and having this wicked sense of humor and approaching everything with humor and fun, meant that I had this really strong sense of, if my mom was able to navigate through that, then I can, do almost anything. And she also she trusted me so much, and that gave me so much confidence at a really young age.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And wouldn't it be lovely to go back however many years when she was in the thick of that, like struggling, probably doubting herself, thinking, am I doing a good job by my kids? And for her to be able to see what you're saying now very publicly about her, like I just wish we could go back in time and give her that gift at the time when she was probably thinking, I'm fucking it all up.
That's
you
right.
know?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, she would say all the time, I have no idea what I'm doing, but all I can do is my best.
So good. Love that. And your limitless man, who would you like to celebrate? You're my first one celebrating a man, so this is the first male shout out we're getting.
Yeah, I'd have to celebrate my husband. I met my husband backpacking in India 20 years ago, and he is the most authentic person I've ever met in my life. And when I first met him, I had this unwavering trust, which I don't think I ever had with anyone outside of my family. And why, and I remember thinking, why do I trust this person so much? And it was because he was so authentic and so honest that he inspired, this incredible sense of trust with me and so many people around him. And in order for you to be authentic to that extent, you have to be really brave and you have to be really vulnerable. And I think that I learned a lot more about authenticity and vulnerability and bravery around, being yourself, from Paul. So he would be my limitless man.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I know how busy you are, so I really appreciate you taking the time to come and share your wisdom around hustling with everyone. And I think the timing of this episode is just so perfect because I think there's a lot of things you said that people really need to hear right now. So thank you, because I know you're busy, but I think the gift that you've given to everyone listening to this is huge. So I'm like genuinely from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I mean, just having the opportunity to talk about this has, given me a lot more to think about too. So thank you for having me, Chloe.
Amazing. Thank you so much.